Hello there, welcome to our next lesson on the Vietnam War. Today we're going to be looking at how did the Americans get drawn into another Asian war. So we've previously learnt about the Korean War. Last lesson we learnt about the Viet Cong and who they were. So today's lesson is going to be slightly shorter because I want to give you an opportunity to go back and complete the work from last lesson. The work set on the Vietnam War last Thursday has not been fully completed by a lot of the class. So if you are not at a stage to start this lesson, you must go back and complete that lesson on the Viet Cong. You know, it is important to be completing your work. This work is work that you will need for your exams at the end of next year. And at the end of next year, when we do have time to revise, it's important that we've at least gone over everything once. So if you need to, please pause here, go back and complete your work from last Thursday. Otherwise, you can keep going. So to start off with, I've got 5 quick quiz questions for you. All work needs to be completed in your assignment section. You can just simply type into it, and once you've finished, you need to make sure you submit your work to me. So the first question was, who were the Viet Cong? Second question is, define the term guerrilla warfare. Question 3, list 3 tactics or booby traps used by the Viet Cong. Question 4, why were the Viet Cong so successful? And question 5, what theory did the Americans believe which prompted them to focus on containing communism in both Korea and in Vietnam? So pause the video here for 5 minutes and go off and complete those questions for me. Okay, so the Viet Cong was actually a term phrased by Diem, the leader of the South. They were Vietnamese communists from the North who were trying to unify the whole of Vietnam as one country under communism, and the leader of that group was Ho Chi Minh. Guerrilla warfare is a specific type of warfare where you don't take on an army front on, but you use tactics to try and avoid them and create maximum damage to them while taking few casualties. So that might be an ambush or laying booby traps to try and kill and scare and intimidate the larger armed force. 3 tactics or booby traps used by the Viet Cong. You could talk about the tunnel system they created, the Ho Chi Minh Trail that kept them supplied. You could talk about the spike pits, the ambushes, hanging onto American belts, so standing so close to the American troops that actually the Americans wouldn't want to use their airplanes because they would be dropping bombs too close to their own soldiers. Things like spike balls, bouncing Betty landmines, which are spring-loaded grenades that when triggered fly up to about waist level and then explode, causing huge amount of damage. Why were the Viet Cong so successful? The Viet Cong were really successful because of their guerrilla warfare tactics, because the Americans couldn't actually find them to destroy them. And the American soldiers were very scared of walking through the jungles because they knew the Viet Cong had left traps for them. But also the Viet Cong were very popular amongst the villagers, and they'd often hide amongst the villagers and be kept away from the Americans. What theory did the Americans believe which prompted them to focus on containing communism? The answer to that question is the domino theory. The domino theory, the idea that if one country falls to communism, then the next one will too. Please make sure you've got all answers written in your assignments. When we get back to school, I will be printing out these assignments so you have these in your books as kind of hard notes. They're not going to just be, evaporate and never see them again. Let's get on with today. So today we're just going to have a recap on why the Viet Cong was so successful, and then we're going to jump into how the US got more and more involved. So the Viet Cong was successful then because they received huge amounts of public support. They worked with local people, they trained them, and they won their respect. Diem was not a popular leader, and the Americans were not very popular either. So actually the people of the South, the villagers in the South, actually saw the Viet Cong as their allies. There were more than 100,000 Viet Cong troops in southern Vietnam by the early 1960s, so they could win a lot of people over. Their tactics were very impressive. They knew the landscape. They were used to fighting in the jungles, whereas the Americans weren't. Diem was very unpopular, and in 1963 he was actually overthrown and killed by his own troops. Diem was the a person who persecuted against Buddhists within the country, who were the largest kind of religious group, and that led to monks actually burning themselves in protest. We looked at those images the other lesson. So we are going to go from isolation to domino theory. So the first thing I want you to do is I want you to tell me, what is isolationism mean? Pause the video and write it in your assignments. I'll give you 2 minutes to do that. Okay, so isolationism it is quite literally when America isolated itself from other issues. It didn't get itself involved in any other affairs, any other issues of other countries, because it didn't want to have to spend money helping other people. However, the USSR got stronger and communism spread through Eastern Europe. The US became increasingly concerned about the domino theory that communism would also spread through Asia. So I want you to go back to your assignments. I just want you to spend 2 minutes. I want you to explain why the US moved from a period of isolationism to a period of intervention. See you in 2 minutes. Okay, so they moved into a period of intervention because they believed they had to stop communism from spreading. Communism was the biggest and most scary thing to Americans at the time. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at 4 US presidents and look at their involvements. The information is on your assignments, but it's also going to be coming up on the screen. So we're going to go through each president individually, and you need to fill in the table. You need to fill in your table to say what each one's involvement was. And I don't want it to just be like 2 or 3 words. You need to write in detail about what their involvement was. So let's have a look at the first president. The first president was Truman, and Truman was the president in the 1940s. Truman followed a policy of isolationism. He was the president during the Second World War. After World War II, Japan lost and Vietnam ruled itself. A communist group who resisted the Japanese were called the Viet Minh, who took over. The French weren't very happy with this. They came to get Vietnam back and fought the Viet Minh. The Americans gave the French money as they were fighting against communism in Vietnam. So what I'd say for Truman is that he believed in isolationism and that he gave money to the French to keep them fighting against communism. So pause the video there for just 2 minutes and fill in that part of the table for me. Okay, so let's have a look at Eisenhower. Eisenhower was the second president to be involved in the Vietnam War. The French gave up in 1954 because they couldn't afford to fight anymore. Vietnam was split into a communist north and a capitalist south, with elections held in 2 years' time to determine its future. The Americans stopped the elections from happening as they were pretty sure the communist leader would win. Instead, Eisenhower helped the capitalist southern leader called Ngo Dinh Diem in the hope he would take over the north and make it capitalist too. So the US president, Eisenhower, got involved by stopping the election from happening and putting in place his own person. So he put in place his own leader to keep capitalism in Vietnam. Diem was unpopular and corrupt, but the Americans carried on giving him money anyway because he was a capitalist. So he was a poor leader, but the Americans continued to support him. Eisenhower and his Secretary of State, J.F. Dulles, were convinced that the USSR wanted to spread communism throughout Asia. They believed that if Vietnam fell to communism, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Burma, and maybe even India would also turn to communism. So Eisenhower was increasingly scared of communism. Eisenhower continued to provide military aid to South Vietnam, and he handed them $1.6 billion between 1954 and 1960. So that's another thing you can put in your table. Not only did he send him money, but they also sent military advisors into South Vietnam to train the army on how to fight the Viet Cong. So these were not soldiers that were going to be sent to fight them. They were actually advisors to go and help train the army. So Eisenhower's intervention then is huge amounts of money, $1.6 billion given to the South Vietnamese government. He inserted a capitalist leader, DM, even though he was unpopular, but he knew that he would protect capitalism in the country, and they also sent military advisors to help train the army. Pause the video there if you need to, otherwise we're going to continue to move on. So Kennedy then. JF Kennedy, very famous as he was assassinated in 1963, but before his assassination he also dealt with the, the war in Vietnam. So by 1961, Kennedy increased the number of military advisors to 800, and he allowed US pilots to fly combat missions whilst pretending that they were instructors. So there are more soldiers going out there, but they're only there to advise. And he also allows US pilots to fly combat missions, but they were kind of pretending that they were instructors. So they probably shouldn't have been doing that. In 1962, 11,000 American troops were in Vietnam. So these are advisors still, but you've seen the number of advisors has gone from 800 to 11,000 in just 1 year. Kennedy sent more money to help the capitalist Vietnamese government. The Viet Cong attacked American Air Force and supply bases as well. Kennedy continued to pour money into Vietnam, and by 1962, as I said, there were 11,500 Americans providing training to locals. Kennedy also formed the Strategic Hamlets Program. Please write down the Strategic Hamlets Program. He would pay or give money for villagers who were thought to be helping or fighting with the Viet Cong. He would force them to move out of areas of Viet Cong influence, and he would move them to areas of capitalist influence. And he would do that against their will. A lot of the money that was given actually was taken. There was issues with corruption. But Kennedy removed people from communist influenced areas into kind of capitalist areas. The USA provided all the materials, but the scheme failed as it just made the Vietnamese hate the Americans and capitalist corrupt officials and want to accept the Viet Cong even more. So the problem with the Strategic Hamlets Program is Kennedy, by trying to force people to move, he actually angered them even more, and he turned more people over to the Viet Cong. So finish your section on Kennedy for me. Well, you can pause it for just 2 minutes if you like and catch up. Otherwise, we're going to continue to move. So Kennedy then obviously was assassinated. In 1963, he was assassinated. He was shot in the neck, back and head and died shortly afterwards. We're fairly sure that it was Lee Harvey Oswald that assassinated him, although there are conspiracy theorists that believe that it was someone different. One of the big issues for conspiracy theorists is Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested, but he actually never made it into a police station to have an interview because a nightclub owner called Jack Ruby assassinated him. And that was actually done on television. You can, the news were recording him coming in, and the news recorded Jack Ruby walking up and shooting him. As Ruby also dies in prison, quite young, so that's another kind of cover-up for a conspiracy. As Oswald was assassinated before he gave his evidence, we don't actually know who killed Kennedy. But we're fairly sure it was Lee Harvey Oswald. Some think he was hypnotized by the CIA to assassinate Kennedy, as the mafia and Cuban exiles disliked him from the Bay of Pigs invasion. Although in reality, it's very hard to hypnotize someone to do that. So the key issue here is that Kennedy is assassinated, and Kennedy is one of the most liked presidents for a number of years. So people really didn't want Kennedy to die, though. He was very popular. And the man that replaced him was Kennedy's vice president. And vice president was a man called Lyndon B. Johnson. Now, Lyndon B. Johnson was never elected into office. Instead, he had to follow the death of Kennedy. So a lot of people were very distraught at Kennedy dying. And Johnson knew that he had to kind of fall in line with what Kennedy was doing so that people continued to support him. He was sworn in as the new president when Kennedy was assassinated. He had to get as much support as possible as he wasn't voted in. He thought being tough on communism would help, just like Kennedy was. He also said that he was preserving Kennedy's memory as he was tough on communism in Vietnam. So Kennedy was pretty much going to follow what, Johnson was pretty much going to follow what Kennedy did. Johnson increased the numbers sent into Vietnam after he came into power. So the important thing to note, except for the fact that he was tough on communism and he followed Kennedy, was that by the time he was in office, 1964, the number of people, advisors, military advisors that were there went up to 23,000. So under Truman, there were 800, and under Johnson, there are 23,000 troops. And remember, they're not there to fight; they are there to stand by and train these South Vietnamese against the Viet Cong. So they are just trainers. But that's a large army to have based in Vietnam. So if something did happen and if America did need to get itself involved in a war, it had a lot of soldiers in the area, which would made it very powerful and strong. Okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to please finish that table for me, and then what you'll see is underneath you'll see 5 questions. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to think about the table, use the table that you've just created to complete those 5 questions. I'd like you to write them in full sentences, giving as much detail as possible. And I will see you in about 10 minutes time. So it should take you 10 minutes to complete those questions for me. So the first question is, what do all the presidents have in common? Question 2 is, why are they only sending advisors instead of troops? Question 3 is, what was the Strategic Hamlets Program? Question 4, how close to war was Johnson in 1964? And question 5, what do you think it would take for America to declare war on Vietnam? So pause the video there and I'll see you in 5 minutes. Okay, so all of these presidents are tough on communism. Okay, they all believe in the domino theory, they all believe in containing communism, and they all are worried that the domino theory will cause a large spread of communism throughout the Eastern world. They're sending advisors instead of troops because if they send troops, that's an act of war and it's seen as very aggressive, and that would escalate the situation, and America doesn't want to be the aggressor. The Strategic Hamlets Program was the system created by Kennedy, which uprooted and moved families away from communist areas into capitalist influenced areas. So as a result, they would not be under the influence of communists. It was incredibly controversial because it turned a lot of the villagers away from America because they were seen as bullying them, and they went closer to Ho Chi Minh. Johnson in 1964 was very close to war. He had a large amount of American troops in Vietnam. He was getting himself ready for something. And finally, what do you think it would take America to declare war on Vietnam? It needs an aggression. It needs a reason to start fighting. America can't just walk into Vietnam and all guns blazing. America needs pure, just cause to go to war. That might be an attack on American soldiers or ships, or it might be Vietnam declaring war first. But America was definitely not going to declare war on Vietnam without being provoked. Okay, so the final task today, I'd like you to write 2 paragraphs, please. Okay, we're looking at why did the USA become increasingly involved in Vietnam. You can talk about money, you can talk about advisors, you can talk about the Strategic Hamlets Program, you can talk about the domino theory, you can talk about containment, the fear of communism, but I'm looking for 2 paragraphs. So my suggestion would be the first paragraph could be on troops and advisors, and the second paragraph could be on the domino theory and containment. I'm looking forward to seeing your 2 paragraphs. Please make sure you write them in full sentences, and a paragraph needs a minimum of 3 sentences. So minimum, if we're working at a minimum, which we should be working higher than the minimum, we need to have at least 6 sentences written down for this task, please. I'm going to give you 10 minutes to complete this task, and I will join you at the end of that 10 minutes. So pause the video there and give it a go. Okay, thank you very much for all your hard work today. Thank you for completing those questions. Please make sure you submit this work to me. it's important that you hand it in using the assignment function. And finally, remember that if you haven't completed the lesson on Viet Cong, you need to go back and do that. It's essential that you do not miss that lesson. You can do it later on today, or you can do it over the weekend. But for those of you that haven't completed, I do want to see. I do want to see that handed to me. I am looking to give some feedback next week, whether that's feedback on Teams or whether I'm going to have to make a phone call to some homes. That'll be decided by what I see on Monday when I log into my assignments. So good luck, and I will see you later on in the week. Thank you very much, boys.